Hey guys, tonight we step onto the misty shores of Scandinavia, where the wind carries the tang of salt, smoke, and something you can't quite name but suspect might be the Viking version of breakfast. You probably wouldn't survive one day here, and honestly, that's okay. You can sit back, sip your tea, and live vicariously through my narration. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, comment your location and local time. I'm curious where you're joining me from, whether it's a sleepy Sunday evening or a chaotic Tuesday morning. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning fog clings to your skin as you step from the sand onto packed dirt. Tiny pebbles crunch beneath your feet, and gulls wheel overhead, their cries more judgmental than helpful. Across the bay, a longhouse smokes gently, a chimney spitting out spirals that mingle with the mist. You inhale deeply, tasting the sea, the wood smoke, and a faint, unplaceable tang of iron. Somewhere, a goat grumbles in protest, probably just waking up, probably judging your shoes. You glance around. Around you, life thrums quietly. Women carry water from the well, their skirts brushing against reeds. Children dart in and out of shadows, giggling at some invisible joke. A man sharpens a blade, the scrape and spark bouncing lightly across the morning air. You realize immediately, nothing here is soft or cushioned, and yet there's a rhythm, a strange sort of comfort in the chaos. The Vikings had a simple rule: survive or don't. Most mornings were a test of both patience and ingenuity. People rose with the sun, or slightly before it if they had chores that required avoiding the goats, and they moved through a world without alarm clocks, heating systems, or pre-washed laundry. You'd be cold, probably damp, and definitely aware of every scratchy layer of wool against your skin. Historians still wonder if some of these discomforts were tolerated simply because there was no alternative, or if they secretly believed a bit of suffering built character. You, sitting on your couch, have already won the first round. You take a tentative step closer to the longhouse. Its walls are timbered, with straw filling the gaps. Smoke curls lazily from a small chimney, carrying the smell of yesterday's stew and fresh wood. If you listen carefully, you can hear the quiet creak of the roof boards and the scuff of feet on packed dirt inside. It's alive, breathing with the motions of people, animals, and a rhythm of life you've only ever glimpsed in documentaries or fantasy novels. And yes, there's a subtle warning you can't ignore. The Vikings were expert survivors, but survival meant muscle, awareness, and a tolerance for discomfort that modern humans tend to underestimate. You'd likely trip over a goat, burn your hands on a cooking pot, or forget which way to point the spear, and it wouldn't end well. But tonight, you're safe. Tonight, you're an observer, and that's exactly how it should be. You notice a dog padding softly along the shore. Its fur is matted in places, smelling faintly of the sea and whatever the Vikings consider breakfast scraps. The dog eyes you with mild curiosity, which is lucky. It hasn't decided whether you're a threat or a meal. Perhaps the most Viking thing about this dog is that it doesn't care about your opinions. It simply moves, survives, and occasionally looks adorable enough to distract from its usefulness. Around you, other sensory details emerge. The distant clang of a hammer as someone repairs a tool. The metallic tang in the air from iron, knives, hooks, nails, all essential tools for everyday life. And faintly, a song rises from the longhouse, sung low and steady, probably recounting an old tale of conquest or cleverness, and it makes the mist feel almost magical, even if you wouldn't last an hour here without collapsing from fatigue or minor injuries. You're also aware, in the back of your mind, that some parts of Viking life remain mysteries. Historians still wonder if certain rituals were deeply spiritual or just cleverly disguised ways to keep people working hard. The mix of fact and folklore blurs at the edges, creating a world that is vivid yet just out of reach, a perfect backdrop for an immersive bedtime story. A light breeze carries hints of more scents: peat smoke, dried fish, and the faintest touch of flowers, stubbornly surviving in rocky soil. You realize that every inhale is a lesson in patience and observation, every sound a note in a symphony you could never fully replicate. It's a world that thrives on awareness, alertness, and, above all, adaptation. And as you settle into this imagined shoreline, you can almost feel your own pulse slowing to match it, the fog of your modern worries melting into something quieter, something gentler. So you take another careful step forward. Imagine your fingers brushing against the rough-hewn wooden doorframe of the longhouse, the surface warm from the lingering fire inside. Somewhere, a child laughs at a small mishap, a dropped tool, a scuff on the floor, and you think, yes, there's life here, strange and demanding, yet intimately human. You could never live like this for long, but for now, you're part of it, part of the mist, the smoke, the rhythm, the low hum of a world that existed 1,000 years ago, and somehow, it feels just close enough to touch. The morning stretches slowly, and you feel it in your bones, the kind of cold that makes you question every fashion choice you've ever made. You follow the faint trail of smoke and the crunch of early footsteps toward a small cluster of Viking farms, where the day's first chores are already underway. Women kneel by the edge of the garden, pulling weeds or tossing seeds into the soft, dark soil, while the men sharpen tools, inspect fences, and occasionally grunt at cows who think the new day has nothing to do with chores. You're reminded immediately that Vikings did not have snooze buttons, central heating, or coffee makers. The morning was a test of patience, endurance, and, frankly, balance. You will almost certainly fail at all three if you tried to help. You bend to pick up a bucket of water from the well and realize it's heavier than it looks, the wood slippery under your damp fingers. Water is a precious resource here, and hauling it is an exercise in humility, muscle, and the occasional curse. One splash of cold water dribbles down your arm, and you shiver in protest, instantly regretting any imagined fantasy of Viking heroism. Historians still wonder how much physical labor shaped not just daily life, but the overall strength and resilience of the people. You suspect that anyone who can haul water, herd goats, and chop firewood before breakfast deserves a medal, or at least a very long nap afterward. Breakfast is a humble affair. You sit on a low wooden bench next to a steaming pot of porridge, the kind that is more filler than flavor, topped with a dash of salt, a drizzle of honey if available, and whatever berries survived the frost. It smells earthy, wholesome, and faintly of metal, probably from the iron pot it's cooked in. You try a spoonful, and the texture feels strangely comforting yet suspiciously like eating wet sawdust. Curiously, Vikings often ate in silence, or with low conversation about chores, weather, and livestock. The thought of them gossiping about you, the strange visitor who can barely hold a bucket upright, is both hilarious and humbling. You watch a man attempt to milk a cow, and the cow clearly has no patience for your fascination. The bucket wobbles precariously, and you consider whether it would be better to let him fail entirely and save yourself the embarrassment of intervention. Lifting the cow's tail, he mutters a word you don't understand but somehow senses both a warning and a plea for cooperation. Quirky as it seems, livestock had personalities here. Some cows were gentle and forgiving, others were cunning and downright mean. Historians still debate whether people actually named each cow, or if it was a storytelling embellishment, but you're willing to bet that it would make daily chores slightly more entertaining. The morning air is sharp, with a whisper of frost still clinging to the edges of the grass, and your fingers are beginning to regret exposure. Every task, from sweeping the longhouse floor to tying bundles of firewood, requires focus and precision. You notice the rhythm of work, almost musical in its repetition: scrape, lift, twist, drop, repeat. Even as a visitor, you can feel the cadence, a kind of low, grounding heartbeat that anchors the day. If you close your eyes for a moment, you almost forget that this is not your world, that you are imagining each sensation while remaining perfectly safe and dry. Children emerge from the shadows of the longhouse, tiny bundles of energy with mud-streaked faces. They carry small tools and join in the chores with an eagerness that borders on reckless. One child chases a chicken across the yard, its wings flapping wildly, scattering straw like confetti. You instinctively step aside to avoid being trampled, and you notice how integrated play and work were for Viking children. There was no strict division. Learning the skills to survive often came with laughter, mischief, and a fair amount of chaos. You could almost imagine being swept up in it, though your coordination would almost certainly betray you. As the morning sun climbs higher, you become aware of small details that matter enormously here. The scent of damp wool, the creak of timber, the distant clatter of a pot being cleaned, all these sounds form a symphony of domestic life that modern silence cannot replicate. You step closer to a fire pit where ashes still glow faintly from last night's cooking, imagining the meticulous attention required to manage heat for cooking, warmth, and sometimes storytelling. Vikings depended on these small routines to survive the unpredictability of weather, illness, and scarce resources. One wrong move, a neglected fire, a spilled bucket, a misjudged fence repair, could have cascading consequences. Yet there is humor hidden in these tasks. You almost trip over a broom left carelessly on the path, and a cat eyes you with unmistakable disdain, as if saying, "Humans. Always overcomplicating things." You chuckle, realizing that even in a harsh, demanding world, moments of levity emerge naturally. A goat nibbling someone's sleeve, a child trying to mimic adult work, or someone singing off-key while pounding nails. These little quirks remind you that Vikings, for all their strength and endurance, were still profoundly human, and prone to mistakes, laughter, and occasional chaos. By mid-morning, your imagination is full of sights, smells, and sounds. You sense the effort required for basic survival, hauling water, milking cows, tending crops, but also the subtle joy of accomplishment. The chores aren't glamorous, they are grounding, necessary, and oddly satisfying to witness. And while you might struggle to keep up physically, mentally you're soaking in the rhythm, noticing patterns, and understanding the careful balance between work, rest, and community that made Viking life endure through centuries. You pause to take a deep breath. The air is fresher here, tinged with sea salt and earth, and you feel, if only for a moment, a quiet respect for the people who rise, toil, and survive long before coffee, central heating, or alarm clocks existed. They move through life with a grace born of necessity, and even as a visitor, you start to match their rhythm in your imagination, step by careful step. It's exhausting, sure, but also strangely calming, like a meditation disguised as labor. You step inside the longhouse, and the first thing that hits you is warmth, a kind of welcoming, smoky warmth that feels like the house itself is exhaling. Your eyes adjust to the dim light, flickering from the central fire pit that spits little sparks upward, some of which land harmlessly on straw mats. The air is rich with smells, roasted meat from last night, damp wool from sleeping piles, and the faint, almost imperceptible tang of iron from tools scattered about. You realize immediately that longhouses are living entities, breathing with the movements, voices, and labors of their inhabitants. You probably wouldn't survive 10 minutes without bumping into a goat, a child, or a swinging kettle, but that's part of the charm. Around you, people move with quiet purpose. Women tend to household tasks, stirring porridge, mending garments, or weaving on small looms. Men sharpen knives, stack firewood, or recount tales from their journeys while keeping a watchful eye on the fire. The children scamper between adults, their laughter mingling with low conversation, occasional clanging, and the rhythmic tapping of tools on wood. You notice how everything has a sound, a subtle symphony of life that you've never experienced before, and it's oddly comforting in its chaos. You glance at the walls, which are lined with simple wooden pegs, shelves, and hooks. Weapons hang alongside cooking utensils, leather pouches, and bundles of herbs. It's efficient, practical, and slightly intimidating if you consider that each item has a purpose, and you do not yet know what any of them do. Historians still debate how organized Viking longhouses really were, whether they were meticulously arranged for efficiency or simply survived in whatever chaotic order the household could maintain. You lean toward a middle ground. There's method in the madness, and you're just not part of the system. A cat wins its way past your legs, tail high, apparently judging your every step. Somewhere, a dog snores lightly in a corner, half under a pile of straw, half under the child who thinks it's a mattress. You almost step on a wooden bowl and catch it just in time, barely, and realize that even though everything here looks simple, it requires constant attention. One misstep, and a chain reaction of chaos unfolds, spilled food, tripped children, scolded hands. The Vikings thrived in this environment because they learned to anticipate it all, sometimes with humor, sometimes with sheer grit. You move closer to the fire and notice the flames flickering against the wooden beams. Each spark carries warmth, light, and a subtle warning. This fire is the heartbeat of the longhouse. It cooks, heats, illuminates, and protects. You probably wouldn't survive without it, not just from cold, but from the quiet vulnerability of being exposed in the open. The longhouse itself is designed as a defensive cocoon, and you can feel the cleverness of its builders. Narrow entrances, low ceilings that keep heat in, and walls thick enough to block wind but thin enough to let smoke escape. The architecture is practical and alive, responding to every need of those who dwell within it. You notice a man carving a piece of wood, his hands deft and precise. Every movement seems deliberate, practiced over countless repetitions. He hums a low tune as he works, and you realize that music and rhythm are embedded even in labor. You probably wouldn't survive 10 minutes trying to replicate that precision. You'd splinter the wood, nick your finger, or ruin the shape entirely. Yet observing him, you feel a connection across centuries, a shared sense of purpose, a quiet joy in skillful work, and perhaps the faintest twinge of envy. The smells change subtly as breakfast preparations conclude. Fresh bread cools on a wooden plank, porridge thickens in the iron pot, and roasted meat releases tiny wisps of fat that curl toward the ceiling. You imagine reaching for a piece of bread, still warm, and tasting it, though you wisely leave the meal to the family. Food in the longhouse is communal, shared, and often a reflection of resourcefulness as much as taste. Vikings made do with what was available, and the combination of simplicity and necessity created flavors that, to a modern palate, are both rustic and strangely satisfying. Children dart past again, squealing in mock fear at a sibling armed with a small wooden stick. You step aside, narrowly avoiding collision, and notice that play and work exist simultaneously. Even the smallest ones are learning, whether it's to fetch water, sweep straw, or negotiate a playful skirmish. It's a system that molds competence with humor, curiosity, and occasional chaos. You probably wouldn't survive trying to enforce order here, and perhaps it's better that way. The rhythm of life depends on adaptation, observation, and an appreciation for small victories amid the daily grind. You pause by the central post, a sturdy beam supporting the roof, and consider the ingenious simplicity of the longhouse. Each element has a function: fire, warmth, storage, sleeping arrangements, and social space all intertwined. Historians still debate whether longhouses were primarily practical or also symbolic, representing social hierarchy and familial cohesion. You lean back slightly, imagining centuries of stories embedded in these beams: births, deaths, laughter, arguments, meals, and quiet nights watching the fire. A faint breeze slips through a crack near the door, carrying smells of smoke, peat, and something sweet, perhaps dried herbs or early flowers from a hidden garden. The sensory detail grounds you, reminding you that even in the roughness of life, beauty persists in small, unexpected ways. You begin to understand why the Vikings were not only survivors but also observers, musicians, and storytellers. Their environment demanded attentiveness and rewarded curiosity. Finally, you notice the hum of life in the longhouse, subtle but omnipresent. The scrape of a stool, the soft shuffle of feet, the distant bark of a dog, the laughter of a child, the hiss of water on hot coals, all combine into a steady rhythm that is at once grounding and soothing. You realize that this is the real heartbeat of the Viking world, not battles or raids, but ordinary life, lived fully, closely, and often humorously, in the face of cold, danger, and uncertainty. And you, a visitor from a distant future, are quietly swept along in its gentle, chaotic pulse. You sit near the fire, letting its warmth seep into your fingers as you imagine the first meal of the day in earnest. The smell of cooked fish, mixed with a hint of herbs and the ever-present tang of iron from pots and utensils, fills the room. You probably wouldn't survive trying to cook this yourself, too many steps, too many variables, but watching is almost as satisfying. Breakfast isn't about indulgence here, it's about sustenance, community, and occasionally, bragging rights for who caught the best fish the day before. A woman ladles porridge into a wooden bowl, thick and glistening, steam rising like soft clouds over a miniature landscape. Vikings often flavored it with honey or berries if they were lucky, though more often it was just a filling, hot mush to start the day. You take a deep mental inhale, imagining the warm texture against your tongue, and feel oddly comforted by its simplicity. Somehow, even bland porridge seems to embody a life lived fully in rhythm with the earth, animals, and seasons. Historians still wonder if Vikings truly enjoyed these meals or merely tolerated them out of necessity, and you can't help but chuckle at the thought. You'd probably tolerate them too, for about 5 minutes. Meat comes next, usually preserved or salted. You can almost see it, small strips of smoked fish, slices of boiled pork, or perhaps dried venison. Vikings were practical eaters. They used every part of what they hunted or raised, and nothing went to waste. It's a lesson in efficiency that modern kitchens rarely teach. Imagine trying to navigate a day without prepackaged food, refrigeration, or a grocery store. You'd quickly realize just how much of modern comfort masks labor, patience, and ingenuity. Children tug at the edges of your imagination, begging for a taste of something they probably shouldn't have. You watch a small boy nibble a piece of bread while keeping one eye on the stew pot, which simmers with careful attention. You notice how meals are not just about eating, they are social, ritualistic, and sometimes a subtle test of patience. You probably wouldn't survive the constant vigilance required to keep a curious toddler from turning dinner into chaos, yet these small interruptions seem to teach resilience, awareness, and, oddly enough, humor. You notice a curious detail. Vikings often ate with their hands, using spoons only when absolutely necessary. Fingers, wooden knives, and small scoops were common. There's a certain intimacy in this approach, a closeness to the food that modern utensils obscure. It might feel awkward, even unsanitary, by contemporary standards, but it's a practical, earthy habit that mirrors their lifestyle. You imagine your modern self trying to eat a thick stew with bare hands and instantly recognize the skill and patience required. The aroma shifts subtly as smoked fish from the previous day warms near the embers. Its pungency isn't unpleasant, it's just assertive. You probably wouldn't survive a strong whiff without a moment of hesitation, but the Vikings take it in stride. This is food that lasts, food that carries nutrients, and food that sustains life even when the seas are rough or the harvest sparse. You realize the sheer ingenuity in how they preserved and flavored it, using smoke, salt, and sun to extend life far beyond what a modern fridge can do without constant electricity. And yet, there's a quirky charm in some of these habits. Vikings sometimes ate raw or fermented foods, daring the palate in ways you probably wouldn't attempt. Fermented fish or sour dairy might sound horrific at first, but it's a clever adaptation to storage challenges. Historians still debate how widespread such practices were, but it's safe to say curiosity and survival often intertwined, creating meals that were as much experiments as necessities. You can almost hear the laughter of someone challenging another to eat a particularly tangy bite, proving endurance, courage, or just a bad sense of taste. Feasting also had ritualistic elements. Certain foods were reserved for celebrations, blessings, or storytelling nights. A small dish of honey mead might accompany a tale of conquest or a long, slow evening of song. These little indulgences, rare as they were, created rhythm and meaning in a life defined by routine. You imagine sitting among them, savoring the novelty while also marveling at the ingenuity needed to keep such traditions alive without modern conveniences. You probably wouldn't survive their approach to utensils and hygiene, either. Communal eating was messy, sometimes chaotic, and always pragmatic. The longhouse floor often doubled as a dining surface for stray crumbs, dropped utensils, or curious animals. Yet there's humor in the chaos. An unexpected crumb becomes a lesson in awareness, a goat's snatch of bread becomes a story to retell, and minor spills are met with laughter rather than panic. You start to appreciate the resilience and patience these small trials instilled, skills you'd never notice until trying to follow their pace. As the morning meal winds down, you sense the careful balance of sustenance, practicality, and social connection. Food isn't just fuel, it's culture, education, and bonding, all rolled into one rustic package. You might not survive a week trying to replicate these meals, but witnessing them teaches rhythm, appreciation, and subtle humor. You notice, too, how much attention goes into preparation, fire management, ingredient selection, and timing, each step honed over centuries to maintain life efficiently. Finally, you lean back slightly, inhaling the mingled aromas of porridge, roasted meat, herbs, and fire smoke. The scene settles into a quiet hum, a momentary pause before the day's next wave of chores, labor, and observation. You probably wouldn't survive long without careful attention, but in this imagined space, you can savor the intimacy of the moment, the cleverness of resourcefulness, and the understated humor of human ingenuity, a gentle reminder that even in a harsh world, there is comfort in routine, warmth in togetherness, and stories waiting to unfold. You stand and tug at your tunic, suddenly hyper-aware that clothing in the Viking Age is less about fashion and more about survival, and you probably wouldn't survive a single day without understanding this subtle truth. The wool is scratchy against your skin, a persistent reminder that comfort is secondary to warmth. Layers are thick and heavy, yet they trap heat in clever ways. Leather boots press against your toes, stiff and unyielding, and you can't help but wonder how Vikings managed long days without complaining, or perhaps they just complained in ways history didn't record. So, before you imagine adjusting your modern hoodie, realize that every stitch, seam, and strap in Viking attire has a purpose, and you're about to appreciate, or curse, every one. You notice the variety in clothing immediately. Woolen tunics, sometimes dyed in muted earth tones, hang from shoulders, reaching mid-thigh. Leather belts cinch waists and carry pouches or tools. Men wear trousers, women wear skirts or layered garments, and everyone has a cloak or shawl for cold, wet days. You probably wouldn't survive the cold if you ignored these layers, especially during the biting wind that rolls in from fjords or forests. Yet, there's a surprising elegance to the simplicity. Each item is practical, durable, and adapted to an environment that demands resilience. Historians still debate how often the average Viking washed or mended their clothing, a surprisingly common question, given the heavy reliance on wool and leather, but evidence suggests resourcefulness outweighed luxury. You reach for a tunic, tugging it over your head, and immediately feel the texture. Coarse wool scratches against your neck. You wince, imagining having to wear it day after day, winter after winter, and you probably wouldn't survive without occasional adjustments, patches, or perhaps a touch of humor to distract from the constant itch. Accessories are practical too. Brooches hold cloaks in place, belts carry knives or pouches, and simple jewelry marks status or personal taste. It's not flashy by modern standards, but it communicates efficiency and identity simultaneously. Boots, of course, are a revelation. Stiff, ankle-high, and hand-stitched, they offer protection against mud, cold, and rough terrain, but breaking them in is an ordeal. You slip your foot in and immediately regret your optimism. The leather presses oddly, creases sharply, and you stumble a few steps, testing your balance. You probably wouldn't survive a day attempting a long trek in these without blisters, but you admire the craft. Soles are thick enough to prevent punctures, stitching holds firm under pressure, and the boots last for years if treated well. Every imperfection tells a story of survival, ingenuity, and a little stubbornness. Layering brings another challenge: mobility. The more garments you pile on, the heavier and warmer you become, but also the more restricted. You imagine trying to haul firewood, tend animals, or row a boat in these layers and conclude you'd fail spectacularly, probably in a way that would elicit Viking laughter or sympathetic sighs. Yet the layers are clever. They trap air for insulation, wick moisture when worn next to the skin, and allow for adjustments depending on season, task, or weather. Practicality triumphs over aesthetics, and you start to notice the logic behind each fold, seam, and tie. You pause to examine a cloak draped over a peg. Thick, woven wool with a simple leather clasp, it would shield a Viking from rain, wind, and a degree of chill. You imagine wrapping it around yourself and feel a vague, imaginary comfort, though the weight is significant. Vikings mastered adaptability through clothing, A cloak could be a blanket, a shield against wind, or a signal of status. You probably wouldn't survive without this multipurpose thinking, yet observing it, you feel a quiet appreciation for human ingenuity that predates modern outdoor gear by centuries. Then there are the small quirks that make you smile. Some Vikings adorned their tunics with embroidery, simple patterns along hems, or symbolic designs. It's subtle decoration, but it suggests pride and identity within practicality. You imagine a neighbor quipping about your plain tunic, and for the first time, humor creeps into the practical struggle. Clothing isn't just survival, it's personality expressed in wool, leather, and stitches. Gloves or mittens, if you find them, are coarse but effective. They protect hands from frostbite, cuts, and rope burns. You probably wouldn't survive without them if you spent a winter day gathering wood or repairing a fence. Yet their simplicity charms you, the kind of handcraft that embodies centuries of trial and error, a quiet conversation between maker and wearer. Finally, you notice the smell, a mix of lanolin from wool, sweat from labor, and earthiness from repeated wear. Modern perfumes or deodorants could never replicate this, nor would you want them to. This is the authentic scent of survival, resilience, and life in constant motion. You probably wouldn't survive smelling it for long without wincing, yet there's a strange comfort in the realism. Life here is tactile, pungent, and unyielding, and clothing is the first barrier between you and the raw, sometimes harsh, but fascinating world outside. By mid-morning, you adjust your posture, settle the layers, and begin to sense the rhythm. Every scratch, every stiff step, every tug at a strap is a note in the symphony of daily life. You probably wouldn't survive the full day without constant mindfulness, but for now, you're learning, observing, and appreciating a level of practicality modern life rarely demands. You feel, however briefly, like part of the world you've entered, a visitor who understands, at least in imagination, that survival is woven into the very fabric of existence. You pick up a small axe leaning against the wall and instantly understand that Viking life demanded a hands-on relationship with tools. The wood handle is smooth from years of use, but the blade is sharp enough to make you second-guess your confidence. You probably wouldn't survive 10 minutes trying to chop wood or prepare a meal with this inexperience, but observing is just as revealing. Every tool, from knives to adzes, has a rhythm and weight, designed for efficiency and endurance. Historians still debate exactly how specialized every household's tools were, but one thing is clear: a Viking without a knife or axe is a person in serious trouble. The longhouse is scattered with implements, wooden mallets, iron nails, whetstones, and carved spoons. Each has a purpose, and each has been tested by generations of trial and error. You pick up a knife and feel the balance in your hand, imagining how it would be used for everything from preparing food to whittling toys for children. The versatility surprises you. You probably wouldn't survive wielding it in the wrong moment, yet you sense the quiet genius behind such multipurpose objects. Every scratch on the blade tells a story of survival, skill, and adaptability. Outside, the blacksmith hammers at his forge, sparks leaping like tiny fireworks. You can feel the vibrations through the floorboards, and the air is tinged with hot metal and smoke. Blacksmithing is a craft of precision and power, creating tools that sustain life and sometimes end it. It's easy to romanticize raids and battles, but the real backbone of Viking survival lies in the forge, the workshop, and the careful maintenance of equipment. You probably wouldn't survive a week trying to forge iron, yet the sound, rhythm, and smell create a hypnotic, almost meditative atmosphere, one that hints at centuries of ingenuity. Axes vary in size and purpose. Some are broad and heavy, meant for felling trees. Others are small and precise, useful in food preparation or carving wood. You pick up a medium-sized one and test the weight. Even holding it makes your arms protest. Using it for labor seems almost impossible, and yet Vikings did it daily. There's humor in imagining your clumsy attempts, likely dropping the tool, nicking your own fingers, or accidentally splitting a log in the wrong direction. Quirky though it seems, it's this intimate understanding of tools that made survival possible, a knowledge you're only beginning to grasp. Knives are everywhere, and each has its subtle differences. Some are designed for cutting meat, others for intricate carving, and still others for everyday tasks like opening pouches or sharpening sticks. You run your fingers along one blade, noting the groove, the slight curve, and the balance. You probably wouldn't survive without this tactile knowledge, yet the observation is enlightening. Vikings handled life in 3 dimensions, constantly interacting with objects that demanded respect, attention, and skill. Handiness extends beyond combat or food preparation. Consider a wooden bucket, simple yet ingeniously designed to carry water, feed animals, or store grains. You pick it up, testing its weight and durability. The construction is clever, with rings holding planks together and a handle carved to fit comfortably in the hand. You probably wouldn't survive a long day hauling water, yet you marvel at the practicality embedded in these humble objects. Every item solves a problem, often with minimal materials and maximum efficiency. A quirk catches your eye. Vikings often personalized their tools. Carved handles, engraved symbols, or decorative touches were more than aesthetic. They marked ownership, reflected skill, and sometimes carried protective or superstitious meaning. You imagine someone laughing as they recognize a neighbor's signature carving on a favorite axe, a quiet human touch in a life dominated by labor. Historians still wonder whether these details were common or reserved for the elite, but you can see the appeal, small beauty woven into everyday necessity. You glance at ropes coiled neatly in a corner. Strong, fibrous, and surprisingly flexible, they serve countless functions, securing boats, bundling firewood, or tethering animals. You probably wouldn't survive failing to tie one correctly, but watching the precision instills appreciation. Life in the Viking Age demanded constant problem-solving, and mastery of even a simple rope could save hours of labor, or your fingers. By mid-morning, you notice a rhythm emerging: lift, twist, strike, adjust, repeat. Tools demand focus, respect, and anticipation of results. You probably wouldn't survive using them without learning the rhythm, yet observing creates a subtle mindfulness, a connection to centuries of human ingenuity. Even something as mundane as sharpening a blade or carving a spoon feels like participating in a centuries-long dialogue between human need and creativity. Finally, as you set the axe down and step back, you sense the quiet awe embedded in daily survival. Vikings were defined not just by brute strength or legendary raids, but by intimate mastery of tools, clever improvisation, and an enduring respect for the objects that enabled life. You probably wouldn't survive their first week, yet in this imagined space, you understand the elegance, humor, and cleverness of a world built on handiness, persistence, and imagination. The sun climbs higher, spilling light through the small, narrow windows of the longhouse. Dust motes float lazily in the beams, dancing above the central fire, which continues to glow with a steady warmth. You probably wouldn't survive without appreciating the subtle choreography of light, heat, and shadow here, yet watching it all quietly reminds you of the patience woven into daily Viking life. The longhouse is alive with small sounds, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional scrape of a chair, and the soft padding of animals moving between rooms. Each sound punctuates the rhythm of the morning, a gentle music of survival. Outside, the fields beckon. You step into the cold air, the scent of damp earth and sea salt mingling in a bracing mix. The ground is uneven, dotted with rocks, reeds, and patches of stubborn grass, and you probably wouldn't survive a full day without tripping at least once. Yet, even as your footing feels precarious, the scene is strangely beautiful. Farmers bend over rows of crops, their movements methodical and precise, while children chase each other around the edges of tilled soil, their laughter bright against the earthy tones of the landscape. Historians still wonder how much of this work was seasonal necessity versus routine daily maintenance, but you can sense a pattern: effort matched to survival, rhythm matched to nature. You follow a woman who carries a basket of freshly dug roots, her hands moving deftly, efficiently, as though she's conducted this task for decades. The roots are earthy, pungent, and slightly sweet, the kind of food you probably wouldn't survive handling without washing your hands incessantly, but here, practicality trumps modern sensibilities. The roots will be eaten, stored, or ground into flour, depending on need. You notice how every action is purposeful, deliberate, and woven into a larger system, no movement wasted, no task trivial. Nearby, a man tends to a small flock of chickens. He scratches at the earth to uncover worms, guiding the birds with gentle shoves and murmurs. One chicken hops onto his shoulder, and he chuckles quietly, unfazed. You probably wouldn't survive attempting this without chaos ensuing, but observing teaches you patience and improvisation. Animals were partners, teachers, and occasional sources of amusement, and the Vikings understood that survival depended on careful attention to their habits and needs. A peculiar sight catches your attention: a small patch of herbs growing amid the rocks, deliberately tended despite harsh conditions. Vikings were surprisingly savvy about natural remedies, using herbs to flavor food, treat minor ailments, or even ward off insects. You imagine brushing against the leaves, inhaling their fragrance, and feeling the connection between land and life. Historians still debate how widespread this knowledge was. Was it household wisdom passed quietly through generations, or formal knowledge guarded jealously? Either way, you probably wouldn't survive ignoring it. These small details often made a difference between discomfort and illness. The rhythm of work is hypnotic. Women weave, plant, and collect. Men chop, repair, and tend. Children scamper, learn, and imitate. You notice how every task builds upon another, like threads in a tapestry. Even small moments, straightening a fence post, carrying a bucket of water, or guiding an animal, carry intention. You probably wouldn't survive trying to replicate this flow without exhausting yourself, yet watching it in slow motion gives you a sense of quiet mastery, the kind that comes from living intimately with your environment. At the edge of the field, a small stream meanders through mossy rocks. A child bends down to scoop water, giggling as it splashes over fingers. You feel the cool spray on your own imagined hands and realize that water, abundant as it seems to a visitor, was precious and carefully conserved. Vikings understood the rhythms of the seasons, the streams, and the rainfall, and their lives pivoted around these natural cycles. You probably wouldn't survive without constant awareness of such details, yet in this imagined world, you sense the elegance in their adaptability. A goat wanders near the fence, head down, chewing contentedly. It pauses, glances at you with mild suspicion, then returns to its meal. Livestock were essential: milk, meat, labor, and companionship all rolled into a single creature. You probably wouldn't survive an attempt to herd them correctly without chaos, but watching their personalities emerge, stubborn, curious, indifferent, reminds you that Vikings lived among living, unpredictable beings. Every day required negotiation, attention, and patience, qualities you are quietly learning to appreciate. You glance back toward the longhouse and notice the interplay of shadows on its walls as the sun moves across the sky. Inside, smoke rises in soft spirals. Outside, the wind bends reeds and grass in gentle waves. The Vikings' world is one of constant sensory input, requiring alertness, coordination, and rhythm. You probably wouldn't survive ignoring these cues, yet here you are, observing them, imagining yourself moving in time with them. It's a meditation on survival, patience, and connection, a gentle reminder that life is both demanding and beautifully ordered in ways modern conveniences often obscure. By mid-morning, you feel the rhythm of the day settling into your mind: tasks, nature, animals, and people moving in interwoven patterns. You probably wouldn't survive this pace without error, but in this imagined space, you feel a quiet immersion, almost like joining a centuries-old dance that values observation, cleverness, and humor. The Viking day unfolds slowly, intentionally, and with a gentle insistence on awareness, and you, a visitor from a future full of comfort, are swept along, learning to move in step, even if only in imagination. You wander toward the edge of the farm, where the forest begins its slow, dense embrace. The air changes immediately, cooler, heavier, filled with the scent of pine, damp leaves, and the faint tang of moss. You probably wouldn't survive navigating these woods alone, not just because of uneven ground, but because every step demands attentiveness, a hidden root, a slippery stone, or a sudden animal crossing. Yet there's beauty here, an almost meditative quality as sunlight pierces the canopy in thin, golden beams that dance across the undergrowth. The Vikings relied on forests not just for timber, but for food, medicine, and shelter. You watch someone gathering mushrooms and berries, fingers brushing leaves and moss, careful not to disturb the delicate ecosystem. Historians still debate exactly which plants were commonly eaten versus used for medicinal purposes, but the knowledge was precise and passed down meticulously. You probably wouldn't survive misidentifying a mushroom. Though the idea of it is slightly terrifying, it also underscores the Vikings' intimate relationship with their environment. Birdsong punctuates the quiet. A woodpecker taps somewhere in the distance, a crow croaks, and a robin flits between branches. The sounds are subtle yet persistent, a constant reminder that life extends beyond human activity. You notice how Vikings interpreted such signs. Birds, animal tracks, and even wind direction were all pieces of a larger puzzle, used to predict weather, find food, and plan travel. You probably wouldn't survive a day relying on instinct alone, yet imagining yourself attentive to every subtle cue gives you a newfound respect for observational skill. A small stream cuts through the forest floor, its water clear and cold. You kneel, imagining the taste, and feel a sudden appreciation for what we often take for granted: accessible, unpolluted water. Vikings understood the value of these natural resources, and misjudging them could be fatal. You probably wouldn't survive a week without this knowledge, but standing here, you can almost taste the crisp freshness of survival, unfiltered by pipes or purification systems. A curious detail emerges. Some trees have markings, carved symbols, or notches. These might be trail markers, boundary indicators, or reminders for resource gathering. You wonder if Vikings left these for each other, for their children, or simply as habit. Historians still debate the full meaning, but you find humor in imagining a frustrated neighbor stumbling upon a poorly carved map, muttering about someone else's cryptic sense of direction. You probably wouldn't survive navigating solely by these markers, but they hint at a clever, low-tech system of communication and knowledge sharing. The forest isn't silent. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the rustle of branches, and the occasional snapping of twigs keep you alert. You watch a small deer dart through the underbrush, and your heart quickens, not from fear, but from appreciation of how agile and alert creatures are here. Vikings, too, had to maintain constant awareness, whether hunting, foraging, or defending themselves. You probably wouldn't survive a sudden encounter without quick reflexes and careful observation, yet the forest teaches patience, awareness, and the subtle poetry of movement. A strange, almost whimsical note: Vikings sometimes left offerings in the woods, small carved figures, coins, or food, believing in spirits or seeking favor from the unseen. You imagine stumbling across one, raising an eyebrow, and quietly chuckling. Even in the harshness of survival, humans find ways to inject ritual, humor, and belief into daily life. You probably wouldn't survive ignoring such customs if you were part of the community, but observing them adds texture, depth, and a gentle humanity to the forest. You follow a narrow path, branches brushing your shoulders. The ground slopes, roots twist like veins across the earth, and you realize the forest is a classroom in resilience and adaptability. You probably wouldn't survive trying to traverse it hurriedly, but moving slowly, observing, and imagining how Vikings mastered it for food, firewood, and concealment provides an intimate insight into life dictated by rhythm, necessity, and respect. A light wind rustles the treetops, carrying a mixture of scents: pine resin, wet earth, and something faintly sweet, perhaps early wildflowers or a hidden berry patch. The sensory richness is grounding, a stark contrast to your usual modern life filled with filtered air, artificial scents, and predictable terrain. Vikings experienced this constantly, relying on all senses to inform their actions. You probably wouldn't survive without sensory awareness, yet imagining it immerses you fully in their daily reality. Finally, you pause at a small clearing, sunlight spilling in like an invitation. The forest seems alive with possibility: food to gather, materials to collect, lessons to learn. You probably wouldn't survive a single day here without keen observation, skill, and patience, yet the experience is strangely calming, rhythmic, and instructive. You feel a quiet connection to the world as Vikings might have felt, a world that demands attention, rewards mindfulness, and occasionally surprises you with beauty and humor in equal measure. The wind shifts slightly as you step back toward the longhouse, carrying with it the scent of the sea mingled with damp earth. You probably wouldn't survive a day ignoring these subtle cues. Vikings used wind, cloud patterns, and bird flight to predict storms and navigate both land and sea. You notice how the air feels different near the coastline, saltier, sharper, and tinged with the faint aroma of fish and seaweed. Historians still debate exactly how much of their seafaring intuition was instinct versus formal knowledge, but standing here, you feel the rhythm of a world that relied on constant awareness of natural forces. In the distance, a fishing boat rocks gently at the shore, its hull creaking and groaning. You probably wouldn't survive rowing it yourself without a crash course in strength, coordination, and patience, yet observing is enough to appreciate the skill required. Nets are cast with precision, lines tied in intricate knots, and every movement is purposeful. Fishing wasn't merely a source of food, it was a demonstration of timing, strategy, and intimate knowledge of tides and currents. You imagine the satisfaction of a successful catch, the communal meal that follows, and the quiet humor of someone teasing a neighbor over a particularly clumsy attempt. A seabird dives, skimming the waves, and you notice how Vikings might have read these movements as clues. Birds often signal fish below or changing weather patterns above. You probably wouldn't survive interpreting these signals accurately, yet imagining their use deepens your appreciation for survival skills that modern life rarely demands. Every subtle observation mattered: cloud color, wave shape, wind direction, and even animal behavior. The world was a complex puzzle, and Vikings were expert solvers. On the beach, driftwood and debris from the forest and sea litter the sand. You bend down, picking up a smooth, water-polished branch, imagining its possible uses: firewood, tool handle, or building material. You probably wouldn't survive gathering resources haphazardly without knowledge of weight, density, or utility, yet each piece carries the ingenuity of human adaptation. Vikings had to evaluate materials constantly, turning obstacles into opportunity, and waste into resource. You notice a curious detail: small, carved figurines or charms occasionally washed ashore, possibly lost, discarded, or deliberately placed. Vikings often imbued objects with meaning, whether spiritual, superstitious, or protective. Historians still debate whether these were common practice or limited to certain regions, but they reflect a world where practicality and belief intertwined seamlessly. You probably wouldn't survive dismissing these subtle layers of culture. They informed daily behavior, choices, and interactions with the environment. The water laps gently at your feet, cold but not unpleasant. You probably wouldn't survive immersion for long without careful preparation, yet watching the small waves, you sense the pulse of the natural world, rhythmic, persistent, and occasionally unpredictable. Vikings measured time, distance, and opportunity by such subtle patterns. You imagine casting a net, balancing on a boat, or hauling in a line, feeling the rhythm in your own body, even if only in imagination. Nearby, a group of children skip stones, laughing as each one skips successfully or sinks immediately. You probably wouldn't survive their energy, curiosity, and occasional chaos without being slightly overwhelmed, yet the moment is playful, human, and grounding. Vikings understood leisure and learning through play, blending skill, patience, and humor. Even survival required the occasional lightness, a gentle reminder that life could be both serious and whimsical. You spot a man sharpening a harpoon, his attention focused, movements precise. The tool gleams in the sunlight, and you probably wouldn't survive a first attempt without cutting yourself, or worse, but the rhythm of his actions is hypnotic. Each stroke on the whetstone carries centuries of knowledge, demonstrating the subtle intersection of craft, necessity, and patience. You feel a quiet admiration for this blend of labor and art, noticing the humor in how intensely serious such a mundane task can appear. The coastline extends, jagged and wild, with rocky outcrops and hidden coves. Vikings navigated these waters with astonishing skill, guided by instinct, observation, and experience. You probably wouldn't survive without constant vigilance, yet imagining yourself following their rhythm, watching waves, sensing currents, reading clouds, connects you to a long lineage of careful, resourceful travelers. You start to understand that mastery of the environment was not optional, it was life itself. Finally, you step back, inhale the briny air deeply, and let your gaze drift over the landscape, forest meeting field, field meeting shore, and shore blending into endless water. You probably wouldn't survive ignoring these connections, yet here you are, observing, imagining, and internalizing the subtle interplay of land, sea, and life. It's a delicate, rhythmic world, full of observation, humor, and quiet skill, and you feel a gentle pulse aligning you, however briefly, with the steady, deliberate life of Vikings who depended on every small detail for survival. You walk back toward the longhouse as the afternoon sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows that stretch across the uneven ground. The warmth is gentle, but you notice how quickly it can fade when a cloud drifts by, and you probably wouldn't survive without constant attention to weather and temperature. Vikings relied on these subtle changes for planning daily chores, sea travel, and even social gatherings. You take a deep breath, inhaling the mingling scents of smoke, sea, and earth, and feel the rhythm of life adjusting to the shifting light. Inside, the longhouse hums with quiet activity. Someone tends a small spinning wheel, the rhythmic click-click-click filling the space. Wool is stretched, twisted, and wound, transforming into thread that will eventually become garments, rope, or trade goods. You probably wouldn't survive this level of meticulous attention, yet observing the motion is strangely meditative. There's humor in imagining your modern fingers fumbling with the wheel, tangling thread repeatedly, while centuries of Viking expertise make it look effortless. Historians still debate exactly how widely spinning skills were shared among households, but it's clear that this craft was central to daily survival and economy. A child runs past, giggling, holding a small bundle of wool. You notice how early Vikings involved children in work, teaching skill through observation and playful repetition. You probably wouldn't survive trying to maintain this balance between labor and supervision, yet the scene is endearing. Tiny hands learning, parents guiding gently, laughter blending with labor. You realize that survival required teaching and learning simultaneously, a continuous transfer of knowledge embedded in everyday activity. The hearth crackles, sending tiny sparks upward that vanish into the smoke. Someone tends a pot of stew, stirring slowly, checking consistency, and tasting cautiously. You probably wouldn't survive a week without mastering such routines, yet the process is mesmerizing. Each ingredient, each adjustment, is deliberate, shaped by generations of trial, error, and adaptation. Even simple tasks carry lessons about patience, observation, and subtlety. A small quirk catches your attention. Vikings sometimes flavored food with unusual items, like dried herbs or pickled roots, creating flavors that modern palates might find surprising. Historians still wonder how these combinations were discovered, trial and error, local experimentation, or inherited wisdom, but the result is a culture rich with culinary creativity, resourcefulness, and occasional humor. You imagine trying a particularly pungent concoction and grimacing, a tiny reminder that survival often included unexpected, quirky challenges. You notice a neighbor repairing a leather strap, stitching carefully with a needle and thread. The sound is soft but precise, almost rhythmic, like a quiet meditation. You probably wouldn't survive without patience in such delicate tasks, yet watching teaches a gentle lesson in concentration and persistence. The ability to mend, adapt, and preserve objects was vital. A broken strap could mean ruined shoes, a leaky bucket, or worse. Vikings understood that small details often had outsized consequences. Outside, a goat bleats near the fence, demanding attention. Someone calls out, gently scolding, and the animal obeys with amusing reluctance. You probably wouldn't survive herding animals while maintaining all other chores, yet you can see the humor and patience involved. Animals were integral companions and laborious, teaching humans resilience, improvisation, and occasional humility. Each interaction is both practical and subtly instructive, a blend of work and life lessons. The sun tilts lower, and the shadows grow longer. You can feel the transition from afternoon to evening in the cooling air, the shifting quality of light, and the softening of ambient sounds. You probably wouldn't survive ignoring these cues, yet noticing them reminds you of how attuned Vikings were to their surroundings. Every day was measured by subtle indicators: sky color, bird flight, temperature changes, and even smell. Survival demanded constant mindfulness, whether tending fields, cooking, or preparing for nightfall. In a corner, a small pile of tools waits to be cleaned, sharpened, and stored. You probably wouldn't survive ignoring their maintenance. Dull knives, cracked wooden utensils, or frayed ropes could mean disaster, but watching someone perform these tasks is calming. There's rhythm in the motions: scrape, polish, examine, adjust. It's a quiet meditation on responsibility and attention to detail, and even in the mundane, you can detect echoes of humor, perhaps a missing tool, a comical drop, or a minor frustration met with patience. Finally, you pause, taking in the longhouse, the yard, the shifting light, and the surrounding landscape. You probably wouldn't survive the day without observing, learning, and adapting constantly, yet here you are, immersed in the quiet flow of life. It's a blend of labor, care, humor, and attentiveness, a world where even small actions carry meaning. You sense the rhythm of the Viking day, the interplay of effort and observation, and the subtle beauty of a life intimately connected to the environment, its creatures, and its routines. Evening begins to settle, softening the day's light into gentle amber and shadow. You probably wouldn't survive without noticing this shift. The Vikings relied on these cues to plan tasks, meals, and rest. The longhouse takes on a cozy glow, firelight flickering across walls, illuminating tools, textiles, and faces with a warm, golden hue. You inhale the mingling scents of wood smoke, lingering food, and animals, and you can almost feel the rhythm of the household slowing, preparing for night. Historians still wonder exactly how Vikings structured their evenings, how much work continued, how much was dedicated to storytelling or leisure, but you sense a delicate balance emerging. Children gather near the hearth, small faces eager for stories, games, or help with minor chores. You probably wouldn't survive keeping pace with their energy, yet observing teaches a gentle rhythm. Lessons were woven into play, patience and focus practiced without forcing, and curiosity cultivated alongside survival skills. You watch one child carefully trace a pattern on a wooden toy, learning technique while enjoying the freedom of exploration. The interplay of work, teaching, and play is subtle, fluid, and oddly charming. A woman hums quietly while spinning wool, the repetitive sound blending with the crackle of the fire. You probably wouldn't survive mastering this craft in a day, yet the scene is hypnotic. Each rotation of the wheel twists fibers, transforming raw material into thread. There's something soothing about watching steady, purposeful motion, and even imagining yourself here evokes calm attention. Vikings understood that craft required patience, practice, and observation, lessons as applicable to survival as they were to art. Food preparation continues, albeit at a slower pace. Leftover porridge is portioned, smoked fish examined, and the next day's meal planned with practicality in mind. You probably wouldn't survive improvising here without guidance, yet the care taken in planning, storing, and rationing is impressive. Even a simple act like washing utensils or organizing the firewood conveys discipline, foresight, and an unspoken respect for resources. You notice the subtle humor too, the occasional spill, the stubborn piece of meat, or a clumsy child trying to help, all woven seamlessly into daily life. You catch a glimpse of the sky through a window slit. Stars are beginning to appear, faint and twinkling, and the crescent moon casts a silver glow over the landscape. Vikings read these celestial cues for navigation, timekeeping, and even superstition. You probably wouldn't survive navigating without noticing such details, yet the moment is mesmerizing. The vastness above mirrors the meticulous care required below, connecting earth and sky in a subtle, continuous rhythm. A small goat chews quietly near the hearth, eyes half closed, while a cat curls lazily on a woven mat. You probably wouldn't survive managing animals, cooking, children, and tools simultaneously, yet here, all coexists in gentle harmony. Every creature has a place, every task a timing, and every person a role. You sense the balance achieved not through strict rules, but through observation, adaptation, and occasional humor, the way a goat's mischief can remind humans of patience and resilience. A peculiar detail emerges. Some households hung small charms or tokens above doors or near the fire. Perhaps they were symbols of protection, reminders of ancestors, or tiny talismans meant to bring luck. Historians still debate the frequency and purpose of these items, but their presence adds a layer of quiet personality to domestic life. You imagine glancing up at one, raising an eyebrow, and quietly chuckling at the mix of superstition and practicality. Even as the fire dims, conversations continue softly. Neighbors exchange news, jokes, or advice, their voices low but carrying over the ambient crackle of embers. You probably wouldn't survive ignoring the importance of communication here. Social bonds were as crucial as food or tools, but observing reminds you that life wasn't just survival. It was connection, humor, and shared rhythm, subtle yet essential. The longhouse settles into a slow, measured rhythm. Movements are deliberate but relaxed, sounds muted but continuous. You probably wouldn't survive this life without noticing the nuances of timing, flow, and subtle attention, yet in observing it, you feel a sense of calm. There's quiet humor in the small mishaps, a soft satisfaction in routine, and a gentle reassurance that every act, no matter how mundane, has purpose. Finally, you lean back slightly, letting your mind absorb the scene. Firelight flickering, children playing, adults working, animals resting, and night gently approaching. You probably wouldn't survive long without awareness, patience, and adaptability, yet in this imagined moment, you sense a deep harmony. The Viking evening is a meditation on life's small rhythms, blending labor, leisure, learning, and humor into a gentle, continuous flow that readies the household for rest. Night fully descends, and the longhouse glows with a soft, steady warmth from the central hearth. Shadows stretch across walls, and the flickering light illuminates faces, tools, and animals in a slow, calming dance. You probably wouldn't survive the first night without some understanding of fire management, yet watching the careful maintenance of embers, the adding of small logs, and the rhythmic stirring of coals is oddly mesmerizing. The Vikings depended on fire not only for warmth and cooking but also for safety and social cohesion. Historians still debate how precisely they managed fire overnight, but you can sense the careful attention that kept it alive while allowing the household to rest. Children curl near the warmth, some dozing while others whisper quietly, trading stories or small jokes. You probably wouldn't survive keeping them safe, fed, and entertained all at once, yet there's a gentle charm in watching their small rituals unfold. Storytelling begins to emerge organically, tales of the past, of distant lands, of legendary feats. The words float through the air like smoke, embedding lessons about courage, cleverness, and human folly. You probably wouldn't survive narrating these tales yourself without flubbing lines, but absorbing them is calming, almost hypnotic. A figure tends to the fire, carefully checking coals and adding small twigs. The rhythmic sound, the scrape of wood, the soft crackle of flames, is meditative. You probably wouldn't survive tending fire this consistently, yet there's a quiet poetry in the motion. Every spark is both a promise of warmth and a reminder of vulnerability. It's a delicate balance between control and surrender, a dance that the Vikings performed nightly without fail. Outside, the wind rustles through trees and across fields, carrying faint echoes of distant waves and rustling grass. You probably wouldn't survive ignoring these environmental cues. Vikings relied on the subtle sounds of nature to monitor weather, anticipate change, and remain safe. Each gust, each distant bird call, informs decisions about travel, chores, and rest. You feel the connection between human activity and the natural world, the interplay of attention and instinct that shaped daily life. The smell of cooked food lingers, mingling with wood smoke and animal musk. You probably wouldn't survive forgetting to ration or store supplies, yet observing these small practices evokes calm appreciation. Meals are simple but intentional, prepared with care and stored with foresight. The act of eating is not only nourishment but ritual, a quiet reaffirmation of structure and community. Even the occasional burnt piece or overcooked stew carries humor and lessons for the future. A small cat stretches near the fire, tail flicking lazily, while a goat chews quietly nearby. Animals, like humans, follow the rhythm of night. You probably wouldn't survive ignoring their needs, yet their calm presence is reassuring. Each creature moves with purpose, reacts instinctively, and teaches subtle lessons about patience, adaptability, and attentiveness. Observing them, you realize that survival is woven into every life form here, each existing in a careful balance. Someone begins weaving quietly in a corner, fingers moving deftly through threads of wool. You probably wouldn't survive mastering the craft in a single evening, yet watching is soothing. The repetitive motion, the soft rustle of fibers, and the focus required create a meditative atmosphere. Vikings understood that even mundane tasks could be calming, grounding, and subtly instructive, providing rhythm and continuity to the day's end. Small charms and talismans catch your eye, wooden figures, carved symbols, and tokens placed near the hearth or above doors. Historians still debate their purpose, yet you probably wouldn't survive dismissing their significance if you lived among these people. They add personality, belief, and ritual to daily life, reminding you that survival isn't just physical, it's also cultural, spiritual, and occasionally whimsical. As darkness deepens, the longhouse quiets. Conversations are murmurs, movements deliberate but slow, and the fire crackles in gentle constancy. You probably wouldn't survive this night without patience, observation, and adaptability, yet here you are, immersed in a flowing rhythm. The Viking evening is not hurried, it is a slow dance of life, attention, and preparation, infused with humor, subtlety, and care. Finally, you sit back, absorbing the warmth, the light, the sounds, and the steady pulse of life around you. You probably wouldn't survive unprepared in this world, yet you feel a strange intimacy with it, a meditative connection that blends observation, patience, and quiet humor. Night in the Viking longhouse is both sanctuary and instruction, a gentle, living lesson in rhythm, balance, and the delicate art of survival. The longhouse has settled into a hushed rhythm, with only the fire's gentle crackle, occasional shifting of animals, and soft murmurs of sleepers breaking the stillness. You probably wouldn't survive a night alone here without understanding how to respect both the darkness and the life around you, yet simply observing teaches patience, attentiveness, and subtle humor. The shadows play across walls, turning tools and furniture into strange silhouettes that seem to dance with the firelight, and you notice the quiet artistry in everyday objects. Historians still debate how Vikings decorated and organized their spaces, but you sense an intentionality that merges practicality with aesthetic awareness. You walk softly along the longhouse floor, stepping carefully over rugs, sleeping children, and small animals. Each movement requires mindfulness. You probably wouldn't survive a careless step without causing chaos. The scent of smoldering embers mixes with faint hints of herbs hung above the hearth to ward off pests or perhaps bring luck. The small, almost whimsical details remind you that survival wasn't purely utilitarian, it included creativity, ritual, and occasional humor. You imagine someone commenting on a crooked charm, and a neighbor responding with a bemused shrug, a tiny moment of levity in an otherwise structured life. From a corner, a soft hum drifts, someone singing a lullaby to a child. You probably wouldn't survive this role without patience and careful timing, yet the melody is soothing, grounding, and strangely timeless. The notes ripple gently through the longhouse, blending with the ambient crackle and rustle of the night. Vikings incorporated music into daily life, often using it to calm children, signal times of day, or simply share small joys. You notice the interplay between human voice and environmental sound, a subtle layering that transforms routine life into a gentle symphony. Outside, the wind brushes through the longhouse roof, rattling the occasional loose thatch. You probably wouldn't survive the elements without constant vigilance, yet the sound is comforting, a reminder of nature's presence and the skill needed to coexist with it. You pause, listening to the mixture of natural and human rhythms, and notice how intricately intertwined life was with the environment. Every draft, every shift of air, and every creak informs action and adaptation, reinforcing a constant awareness that modern convenience often hides. You approach a small pile of unfinished tools and thread. Someone begins repairing a worn leather strap, their hands moving with delicate precision. You probably wouldn't survive such tasks without training and patience, yet the motion is calming. The rhythm, the scrape, stitch, and gentle tug, is almost hypnotic. Observing teaches that survival depended on care, attentiveness, and quiet repetition, qualities that are easily overlooked in the bustle of modern life. Small imperfections or accidents are met with humor or gentle correction, reflecting the human side of daily discipline. A curious detail emerges. The positioning of sleeping areas and animal spaces suggests careful thought, balancing warmth, safety, and efficiency. Historians still debate the exact reasoning for some layouts, but you probably wouldn't survive if these patterns were ignored. You notice the humor in the clever compromises, animals curled near sleepers for heat, children tucked in carefully, tools arranged for easy access yet out of reach of curious hands. It's a practical choreography, yet one imbued with subtle personality and consideration. The fire's glow dims slightly as coals settle into a steady warmth. You probably wouldn't survive neglecting it, yet the flicker invites contemplation. You feel a connection to centuries of people who maintained their hearths with care, understanding that the fire is central not only to warmth and cooking but also to rhythm, comfort, and social cohesion. It's easy to romanticize the Viking era as harsh and relentless, yet moments like this reveal a gentle, quiet intimacy at the heart of daily life. Outside, a distant owl calls, echoing through the darkened landscape. You probably wouldn't survive interpreting natural signals so accurately, yet its presence feels reassuring. Even in the quiet of night, life continues, layered and interconnected. Vikings moved in harmony with these sounds, responding with attentiveness that allowed survival, subtle amusement, and quiet appreciation for patterns in nature. Finally, you pause near the hearth, inhaling the mingling scents, listening to the symphony of night, and observing the gentle interplay of human and animal life. You probably wouldn't survive this world without alertness, skill, and respect, yet here, immersed in imagination, you feel a deep sense of calm. Night in the Viking longhouse is a continuous, flowing meditation on survival, rhythm, patience, and humor. Every sound, movement, and flicker is a subtle lesson, drawing you into a quiet connection with a world both distant and familiar. The night deepens, and the longhouse is enveloped in a hushed, steady darkness, broken only by the glow of coals and the occasional shifting of animals. You probably wouldn't survive the stillness if you weren't paying attention. Vikings relied on every sound and movement to maintain awareness and security. Each creak of timber, rustle of thatch, or distant howl carries meaning. You notice how the environment becomes both comforting and instructive, teaching patience, attentiveness, and a kind of quiet humility that modern life rarely requires. Outside, the moon casts silver streaks across the landscape, illuminating the field, the forest, and the coastline beyond. You probably wouldn't survive navigating at night without understanding moon phases and landmarks, yet simply observing, you feel the gentle poetry of the scene. Shadows stretch and blend, creating a living painting that shifts with each passing moment. Historians still wonder how much night travel Vikings attempted and how much was limited by caution, but you sense the careful interplay of curiosity and respect for the unknown. Inside, a child stirs, mumbling quietly as a parent reaches to soothe them. You probably wouldn't survive keeping everyone comfortable without keen attention, yet the moment is tender, gentle, and oddly grounding. Small gestures, tucking a blanket, humming a soft tune, or gently guiding a restless hand, demonstrate care, patience, and humor woven seamlessly into the rhythm of life. Observing this interplay of care reinforces the quiet human lessons that survive even amid harsh environments. A soft wind whispers through the open door, carrying scents of pine, salt, and earth. You probably wouldn't survive ignoring such cues. Vikings used these signs for weather prediction, navigation, and understanding their surroundings. Each subtle change in temperature, smell, or sound informs action and expectation. You feel the connection between alertness and survival, the way awareness becomes second nature, and the faint humor in realizing how reliant humans have always been on seemingly trivial details. In a corner, a pot simmers quietly over the coals, releasing a gentle aroma of herbs, grains, and preserved meat. You probably wouldn't survive preparing food with such precision without experience, yet the scene is calming. Cooking is not only sustenance, it is rhythm, observation, and subtle art. Even small mishaps, like a slightly burnt edge or too thick porridge, would have been met with gentle humor, reinforcing resilience and adaptability. The animals shift, a goat nudges a sleeping child, a cat stretches and curls, and the fire crackles softly. You probably wouldn't survive balancing domestic life and care for animals without constant awareness, yet the interactions are oddly soothing. Each creature moves with purpose, reacting instinctively, and teaching lessons in patience, observation, and adaptability. You feel the rhythm of night flowing through everything, from humans to animals, fire to shadows. A curious detail emerges. Some longhouses had small, carved figures placed around the hearth or near sleeping areas. Historians still debate whether these were protective symbols, charms for luck, or simple decorative flourishes, but you probably wouldn't survive dismissing their significance in daily life. Observing them evokes a sense of whimsy and continuity, a reminder that human beings have always sought meaning, humor, and reassurance in small objects. The fire dims further, leaving a gentle warmth and the soft glow of embers. You probably wouldn't survive without maintaining awareness of it, yet the slowing rhythm invites reflection. Every sound, the whisper of wind, the shuffle of a blanket, the distant murmur of water, feeds a meditative calm. You feel yourself attuning to the world as Vikings did, observing, listening, breathing with patience, and appreciating the subtle harmonies of life. Finally, you lean back, allowing the quiet, warmth, and soft illumination to envelop you. You probably wouldn't survive this world without skill, attention, and adaptability, yet in imagination, you feel safe, connected, and serene. The Viking night, with all its subtleties, humor, and rhythm, invites a quiet surrender to observation, patience, and gentle understanding, a world both rigorous and surprisingly tender. Morning approaches quietly, almost shyly, slipping into the longhouse in thin, pale strands of light. The hearth is now a faint glow, more memory than flame. You probably wouldn't survive restarting a fire from such stubborn embers, yet someone nearby does it with a practiced flick of a wrist and a gentle breath, coaxing life back into fading coals. There's an art to it, one part patience, one part intuition, and you watch as sparks bloom, small but determined. Historians still debate how early Viking households began their day, but you feel a natural rhythm guiding the moment, as steady as a tide pulling toward dawn. A soft stir runs through the longhouse as people wake. You probably wouldn't survive getting up this early, especially after a night without mattresses or modern pillows, yet the Vikings rise smoothly, as though held by an inner clock that knows exactly when the day should begin. A few children groan, a dog stretches luxuriously, and one goat decides it's the right time to loudly express its opinions about breakfast. There's humor in the chaos, the small domestic whirlwind that kicks up at sunrise, and it carries the charm of a household that has done this countless times before. Someone begins preparing the morning meal: grains, a little dairy if you're lucky, maybe dried fish that has survived the night without attracting too much attention from the cat. You probably wouldn't survive eating this every morning, but there's a comforting simplicity to it, warm, filling, predictable. You notice the gentle clatter of bowls, the rustle of straw, and the steady scrape of wooden spoons. Even these small sounds feel like part of the dawn ritual, weaving a soft harmony through the longhouse. The door opens, letting in a rush of cold air that smells of dew, soil, and distant water. You probably wouldn't survive a Viking morning without a tolerance for brisk temperatures, yet the chill feels invigorating, anchoring you to the moment. You step outside and see the landscape transformed. Hills glow faintly beneath the first light, the shoreline glimmers, the barn, fields, and forest all awaken in soft gradients of blue and gold. It's a world reborn, almost fragile in its beauty. Historians still wonder how Vikings balanced admiration of the natural world with the harshness of survival, but here you feel both forces gently intertwined. A cluster of villagers gathers outside, talking quietly, trading news, and deciding on tasks for the day, tending livestock, preparing for travel, repairing a boat, or checking fields for damage from the night's weather. You probably wouldn't survive the sheer volume of chores, yet the coordinated flow, everyone working with purpose, feels almost soothing. There's humor too. Someone jokes about the goat's early morning complaints, another teases a neighbor about snoring loud enough to scare off wolves. The banter is light, familiar, and grounding. You walk along the edge of the settlement, observing details you hadn't noticed before: carefully carved wooden posts, small drying racks, bundles of herbs tied with surprising neatness, and footprints curved into pathways from years of repetition. You probably wouldn't survive without learning to read these markings, yet their subtlety is comforting, a reminder that even in a harsh environment, people take time to craft, organize, and beautify their world. As the sun rises higher, the longhouse behind you glows warmly, a living heart of the community. You probably wouldn't survive living here long-term without skill or resilience, but the morning reveals something deeper, a world shaped by collaboration, humor, and a constant dance with nature. The air tastes clean, the earth feels solid beneath your feet, and everything around you hums with a gentle steadiness, as though inviting you to breathe with it, slowly and fully. You take one last look at the settlement, at the smoke rising in thin spirals, the figures moving with purpose, the animals weaving between them, the landscape unfurling in golden light. You probably wouldn't survive this life, but you've been part of it, just long enough to feel the rhythm, the silence, the warmth, and the quiet humanity that pulses through every moment.